How responsible are German officials and politicians for Russia's invasion of Ukraine? New unclassified documents show that while publicly saying one thing, German political leaders from the Social Democrats and the Christian Democrats were heavily involved in lobbying for the Nord Stream pipeline's construction, a pipeline that put Ukraine at risk. Reporters from the German Süddeutsche Zeitung investigated the story. I'm Dr. Kay, a political scientist who looks at how information is shared and how can this new information help us understand political actions. Back at that time, the German government consistently said that the Russian Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline was a private business venture. By repeating this, the German government removed itself from any responsibility for what the gas pipeline meant for Ukraine's security. But they were involved, and they knew about the security risks. The German Ministry of Economy apparently was in close contact with Matthias Warnig from the Nord Stream 2 management. Warnig is a former Stasi agent and a friend of Russian President Vladimir Putin. The gas pipeline made it possible for Russia to directly supply Germany through the Baltic Sea, bypassing Ukraine where other pipelines go through, and making Germany dependent on Russian energy. This bypass meant Ukraine would suffer economically, and more importantly, Ukraine would lose the control of a key gas pathway to Europe, which gave it leverage over Russia. With fewer economic resources and no leverage over Russia, Ukraine and others pointed out the increased vulnerability the country had, that Russia could easily act with aggression towards Ukraine. And there had been a pattern. In 2008, Russia invaded Ukraine's neighbor Georgia. In 2014, there was the annexation of Crimea. Russian-backed troops also went into the Donetsk and Luhansk regions. And in 2014, Malaysia Airlines flight MH17 was shot down over eastern Ukraine. In 2018, there was the Kerch Strait incident, where Russian forces captured 3 Ukrainian naval vessels and 24 sailors and Jesse the dog, who's on one of the ships. And by 2021, the Russian military was building up near Ukraine's border. Despite all of this, these unclassified documents show how persistently German elected officials supported the project. Germany is a multi-party system, and at the time it was governed by the GroKo, short for Große Koalition, or Major Coalition, made up of the country's major parties, the Christian Democrats and the Social Democrats. And this was from 2005 until 2021. And while they publicly promised that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline would not bypass Ukraine, the documents show that they internally did not believe that Russia would honor this commitment. An internal assessment showed that German officials doubted that Russia would continue gas transit through Ukraine after Nord Stream 2 became operational, suggesting that Ukraine's security was not a priority in Germany's decision-making process. It also shows that Germany's support for Nord Stream 2 was largely driven by economic interests. Gazprom highlighted that using Nord Stream 2 exclusively would save $45 to $78 billion over 25 years compared to continuing gas transit through Ukraine. These savings, potentially passed on to German consumers, were what was prioritized. Is that why Germany worked on creating contingency plans for Ukraine? This included proposals for energy cooperation projects to soften the economic impact on Ukraine, and for some, showing that Germany anticipated the negative effects on Ukraine. When Russia did invade Ukraine in early 2022, in Germany, a new government with a new coalition was in place. A government made up of the Green Party, Liberal Democrats, and the SPD that had taken months to form, and only in December 2021 had they reached a coalition agreement. But some of the SPD officials from the last government are still in control. Olaf Scholz is chancellor now. Before that, he was the Minister of Finance. Frank-Walter Steinmeier, who was also Gerhard Schröder's chief of the chancellery, was foreign minister and is now still federal president. When Russia invaded, Christine Lamprecht was Minister of Defense after serving as Minister of Family Affairs, Senior Citizens, Women and Youth in the Merkel coalition. Of course, the CSU and CDU, the Christian Democrats in Germany, had their hand in the Nord Stream lobbying. And now in the opposition, they can sit back and watch. But the focus here is to look at how this new information can help us understand political actions. It was SPD politicians that remained and are part of the new 2021 government. Since the full-scale Russian invasion, and it's called that, so the 2014 invasion in eastern Ukraine is not diminished, and the war, which goes back to 2014, is acknowledged. Since then, could the SPD's economic priorities have cost Ukraine's sovereignty? And could that explain things like why Frank-Walter Steinmeier was uninvited to Kyiv in April 2022, highlighting Ukraine's dissatisfaction with his prior policies and statements that were perceived to be too Russia-friendly, or that Christine Lamprecht, the then defense minister from the SPD, faced criticism for Germany's initial military aid to Ukraine, which included sending 5,000 helmets instead of more substantial military support, an act seen as symbolic of Germany's reluctance to provide significant military aid, or Chancellor Olaf Scholz's reluctance to send German tanks to Ukraine, causing frustration among allies and Ukraine. And it was an approach attributed to the SPD, his party's long-standing policy of balancing relations with Russia and avoiding direct confrontation. Does the Nord Stream lobbying reveal a deeper layer of prioritization of economic ties over military support? Explain the delay in providing heavy weaponry to Ukraine? Could this explain why in the current governing coalition, the Green Party has two important ministries tied to Ukraine's needs? Robert Habeck, the German Federal Minister of Economic Affairs and Climate Action and Vice Chancellor, and Annalena Baerbock is the Foreign Minister. Was this a way to address Ukraine's trust issues towards Germany? What these documents show is that Olaf Scholz and his party prioritized economic ties with Russia and accepted the possibility that Russia would not make good on its assurances, setting the stage for the invasion. Despite what's being interpreted as the acknowledgement of the risks, these politicians went ahead and lobbied behind closed doors for Nord Stream 2.